All right, get ready for this one because we are diving into the world of, get this, polyelectrolyte gels.
Yeah.
Ever heard of them?
I mean, most people haven't, but they're way more common than you might think.
Right, they're like kind of a big deal, but also kind of a mystery.
Exactly. That's what makes them so fascinating.
Okay, so for anyone who isn't a scientist, which I'm assuming is most of us,
Definitely.
what exactly is a polyelectrolyte gel?
Well, think of a sponge, right?
Okay, got it.
But instead of just soaking up water, this sponge can actually change its size dramatically depending on the stuff that's dissolved in the water around it.
So it's like a super sponge, but with a brain.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It's all about this network structure inside the gel and how it interacts with these tiny charged particles called ions.
Ions, right? Like from chemistry class.
Exactly. Yeah. And these ions can actually make the gel swell up like a balloon or shrink down to practically nothing.
Okay, now that's pretty wild, but why should we care about these shape-shifting sponges? What makes them so special?
Well, for starters, they're everywhere. We're talking
Yeah.
contact lenses, diapers, even some foods. But what we're really going to dive into is how they work in our bodies and in cutting-edge science.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. Give me the inside scoop on these gels.
Well, we'll be looking at research on a common type called polyacrylate gels. Don't worry, I've got all the key takeaways from some pretty hardcore scientific papers. We're talking about some truly mind-blowing stuff.
Mind-blowing, really? Like,
Well, get this, mucus.
mucus. You mean like,
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, turns out it's actually a complex polyelectrolyte gel.
No way. You're
No.
telling me snot is basically a high-tech gel.
Pretty much. And it's our body's first line of defense against infection.
Okay, that's both disgusting and fascinating at the same time.
Right. But it doesn't stop there.
Hmm.
Cartilage, the stuff that cushions your joints, also a polyelectrolyte gel. Even DNA itself has similar properties.
Seriously, our DNA is acting like a gel. This is blowing my mind. So these gels, they're like holding us together.
In a way, yeah, they're all about how different parts of our body and even the natural world interact at a microscopic level.
Okay, I'm hooked. So where do we start with all of this? How do we even begin to untangle the science behind these gels?
We've got some awesome sources lined up that dive deep into the relationship between those ions we were talking about and how much these gels can swell.
So it's not just any old salt, it's specific types of ions that make a difference.
Exactly. And get this, some scientists are even using computer models to try to predict how these complex systems work.
Computer models. Now that sounds complicated.
It can be, but don't worry, we'll break it all down.
All right, I'm ready. Let's get into it. Okay, so we're talking ions, right? These tiny little charged particles that seem to have a big impact on how these gels behave.
Yeah, they're like the puppet masters of the gel world, controlling how they move and change.
I like that analogy. So we've got these two main types of ions, monovalent and multivalent, and they're not all created equal, right?
Exactly. Think of monovalent ions, like sodium, as the gentle nudgers. They'll influence the gel, sure, but in a more predictable way.
Okay, so they're like the subtle influencers, not the ones causing a scene.
Precisely. They're important, don't get me wrong, but multivalent ions. Now, those are the real drama queens.
Oh, so those are the ones making the gels do backflips.
You got it. Calcium's a good example.
Mhm.
These multivalent ions can make a gel balloon up or practically vanish depending on their concentration.
No way. So it's not just about how salty the water is. It's about what kind of salt we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's because it's not just about water moving in and out of the gel like a sponge. These ions are interacting with the actual structure of the gel network itself, those long chains of molecules.
So it's like they're latching on and changing the whole thing from the inside out.
Exactly. And depending on the type of ion and how many there are, they can either pull that network tighter, making the gel shrink, or they can let it relax and expand.
So the gel is basically sensing what kind of ions are around and then reacting. That's wild.
Hey, remember how we talked about cross-linking before? Well, that plays a role too.
Right. The tighter the cross-links, the less stretchy the gel, right?
Exactly. It's like the difference between a tightly woven fabric and a loose knit one. The more cross-links, the less the gel can react to those ionic cues.
Okay, so it's like this whole intricate dance between the ions and the gel structure, and that determines what happens.
A very delicate dance. And sometimes that dance can get really dramatic. We call it volume transition.
Volume transition, meaning the gel just decides to change size.
Well, not just change size. We're talking hundreds of times bigger or smaller, just from tweaking the types of ions in the surrounding solution.
Whoa, hold on. So these gels can basically do a disappearing act.
It's pretty amazing, right? And this ability to change so drastically is why understanding these gels is so important, especially in biological systems.
Which brings us back to mucus. You were saying it's a polyelectrolyte gel, but how does that actually work?
Well, it turns out that those same multivalent ions that can make a gel do a disappearing act, they're also controlling how mucus behaves.
You're kidding. So the stickiness, the gooiness, it's all thanks to these ions.
Pretty much. They dictate how thick and viscous it is, whether it traps pathogens or lets them pass. It's like a dynamic security system, constantly adjusting its defenses.
So our mucus is like a high-tech gel bodyguard. Now that's something I never expected to learn today. So we've got these like microscopic bouncers made of gel protecting us from all kinds of nasty stuff. But mucus isn't the only place where these polyelectrolyte gels are doing amazing things.
Oh, absolutely. Remember those volume transitions we were talking about, where a gel can suddenly change size? We'll get this. Plants.
Wait, hold up. Plants have gels in them too.
Yeah, it's how they pull off some pretty incredible feats.
Like what? Photosynthesis. Making oxygen.
Even more basic than that. Think about how water travels from the roots all the way up to the leaves of a giant tree.
Okay, yeah, that's always kind of baffled me. It's like defying gravity.
Exactly. And it's all thanks to the xylem, those tiny channels inside the plant. Turns out those xylem walls have gel-like properties, and that's what allows them to pump water upwards.
So the plant is basically using a gel-powered pump. Nature is so cool.
Right. And it gets even wilder.
Yeah.
Our sources hinted at a possible connection between these gels and nerve impulses.
Hold on, you're saying the stuff that lets plants drink water might also be involved in how our brains send signals.
It's still being researched, but the idea is that those sudden volume transitions, the ones that make gels change size so quickly, might actually be happening in our nerve cells too.
So, like, our nerves are using a gel-based system to communicate. That's mind-blowing.
It's pretty incredible. And there's even more. We haven't even touched on those tiny gel-like compartments inside our cells, the membraneless organelles.
Right. Those are mentioned in one of the papers we read, but honestly, my brain was already kind of full by that point. What's so special about them?
Well, they're basically like tiny little factories, each one with a specific job to do. And scientists believe they're able to form and function thanks to those same gel-like properties we've been talking about.
So our cells are using these miniature gel factories to stay organized and keep everything running. This is insane. Who knew gels were so important?
Right. It just goes to show you that even the most common substances can hold incredible secrets. And the more we learn about polyelectrolyte gels, the more we realize how crucial they are, not just for our bodies, but for all sorts of biological processes.
Well, this deep dive has definitely changed the way I see the world. I mean, who would have thought that something as simple as a gel could hold so many mysteries and even potentially the key to future technologies?
Exactly. And that's the beauty of science, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about always asking questions, always looking deeper, and being amazed by the incredible complexity that we find, even in the most unexpected places.
Well said. And to our listeners, next time you encounter a gel, take a moment to appreciate the intricate dance of molecules happening right before your eyes. You might be looking at the future of medicine, technology, or even our understanding of life itself. Until next time, keep those brains curious, folks.